I'm 30 years old, living in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. This story is completely true, though it's not a ghost story. About 2 years ago, I got really into bird photography. I bought a few books on it, including one that was a detailed guide to birds in New Hampshire, where to find them, and when they were most active. It was early March, early in the birdwatching season, but migration trackers showed the first killdeer would be in my area. The book pointed to a pond at the end of a trail near my hometown as an ideal spot to see them. They were most active at dawn. To get the best shot, I had to hike the trail in the dark to get to the spot right at sunrise. I'm a morning person, so I was excited. I left my house at 3:30 a.m. with my trekking pole, headlamp, camera, tripod, binoculars, and all the early morning grit I could muster. When I got to the trailhead, I checked my gear and started walking. I usually hike alone, but it's normally in the daytime on smaller trails, and I always let my husband know where I'm going and when I'll be back. The trails are usually well trafficked, but not today. This was my first time hiking in the dark, and the trail was completely empty, not a single person. The preserve doesn't have official hours, just asks visitors to respect the wildlife and not touch anything you don't need to. The path to the pond was only 2 miles, so I planned to take it slow in the dark and get there around 6 a.m. for the sunrise. About a mile into the trail, I heard a strange noise from the woods, a low growling guttural sound, like a boat engine from a distance. At first, I thought it was a plane from a nearby airport, but the sound was getting louder and closer. I realized it wasn't a plane. 2 small, glowing dots appeared in the woods. I couldn't make out what it was, but something big was stalking me. I've been in dangerous situations before, but I was in control then. This time I wasn't. A rush of primal fear washed over me like cold water. My legs were shaking, wanting to run but unable to move. It's a good thing I didn't run. My boss, who hiked alone all the time, had told me how to deal with large animals like mountain lions, wolves, bears, or moose. He said not to run. Instead, I stood tall, faced the eyes staring at me, tried to make myself look as big as possible, and screamed as loud as I could. Later, I remembered I had a whistle in my camera bag for just such an occasion, but it didn't cross my mind then. I yelled, "Get out!" with all the force I had, like I used to sing Screamo in college. In response, a scream equally as vicious echoed back, like a woman being attacked. The animal took a step toward me. I figured it was a mountain lion. I kept screaming. The scream-off went on for about 5 minutes until it left. I debated what to do next, go back or keep going. I was halfway on the trail, and either way, I risked running into the animal again. But if I turned back, I would have missed my shot at the birds. I decided to press on. When I got to the pond, I set up my camera and got a few beautiful shots of the sunrise. No killdeer that day, unfortunately, but I did see a few ducks, geese, and songbirds. While I was taking pictures with my telephoto lens, I heard coyotes howling nearby. I quickly packed up and headed back. On the way back, other hikers were starting to show up, some with dogs. I didn't run into the animal again. Afterward, my neighbor, who worked for the Forest Service, told me that just one day before my trip, they had released a mother mountain lion and her cubs into the preserve. I thought it was a bit irresponsible to release a mountain lion into an area with a lot of foot traffic. He told me the mountain lion was afraid of people and would have normally run away from a human. It only stood its ground with me because I was the only person there at the time. It gives me chills. This is a true horror story, even though it's not a ghost story. It happened last summer when my best friend Maurice and I took a bike trip to my grandparents' house in what used to be East Germany, the area that was the German Democratic Republic, GDR, before the unification in 1989. The area has this old infrastructure, a lot of houses from the 70s and 80s that are abandoned or run down, which gives it a creepy vibe. There are endless fields and deep forests, and you rarely see anyone outside of a few small villages. After an hour of biking, we crossed the old border, and another hour to get to my grandparent house, exhausted and sunburned. We planned to eat, then set up our tent in the field behind the house for the night, have some drinks, and not bother them. My grandparents' house is in a small village of only about 40 people, at least 3 hours from a major city with no police station nearby, which always made me a bit nervous. My grandparents used to own a modern dairy farm in the 70s, but after the German unification, they were forced to sell it to a big company because they couldn't compete with cheaper products from West Germany. After that, the farm went downhill fast. Many employees lost their jobs, and the cows were poorly cared for, skinny, sick, and not giving milk. My grandmother used to tell a story that everyone in the village knew about Oscar, who owned the farm with my grandparents since 1970. He refused to sell the farm even when he was offered a high price, about 500,000 Deutsche Marks, which is more than 1.2 million euros today. The pressure from the buyers made him desperate. He drank heavily. One evening, he told my grandmother, "Polly, I'm sorry, but I can't take this anymore. I'm not going to sell, but don't worry, you'll see me free in the morning." The next morning, at 4:30 a.m., my grandmother went into the barn to milk the cows. Even though it was the middle of summer, it was raining hard, and the air was heavy. When she turned on the milking area lights, she froze. Oscar had hanged himself. His body was stiff, but his arm was pointing straight at a concrete wall where he had etched the words, "I'm free." After that area was sealed off. No one used it. My grandmother and some of her former colleagues swore that when they walked past the barn early in the morning, they would hear quiet sobbing, exactly like Oscar's voice. Back to last summer, Maurice and I brought our speakers, some beer, and some hard liquor, and biked to a lake about 1 to 2 miles from the village. The dairy farm was between the village and the lake. My grandparents always said that since Oscar's death and the farm being bought, something was wrong with the place. The cows were constantly sick, their food rotted quickly, and the cows had an unusual number of miscarriages. The cows also became aggressive, which was not their normal calm demeanor. At the lake, we drank and laughed. When I told the story about Oscar, it was already dark, unnaturally cold, and a storm was coming. We decided to head back, but only 5 minutes into our ride, it started raining. Biking in the dark, drunk, and in a downpour was a miserable experience. When we got to the farm, Maurice and I, who love exploring abandoned places at night, looked at each other and decided to check out the barn from the story. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the sound of rain hitting the ground. We climbed over the gate. The stench hit us hard, not the normal barn smell, but a rotting stench. When I opened the first barn door, I can't forget the sight. Bony cows covered in wounds standing in ankle-deep feces. They were silent, lifeless, except for one cow that kept pacing, ramming itself into the metal gate. Maurice wanted to leave, but I insisted on seeing the room where Oscar died. When I stepped in, my body screamed at me to run. Then we saw the rope and the etching on the wall. I felt sick, and I threw up right there, maybe from the beer or from fear. Suddenly, lightning flashed, lighting up the whole room. In that moment, we saw a shadow hanging from the rope, its arm pointing toward the wall. We screamed and ran for our lives. The cow also started screaming, not moving, just screaming. I don't remember how I climbed over the gate. I just remember biking as fast as I could to my grandparents' house. Even there, we could still hear the cow screaming. Maurice claimed it was the alcohol, but I know what I saw. That screaming still haunts my dreams. My roommate and I used to love taking drives on the mountain roads. I've lived my whole life in this college town and had driven that mountain road hundreds of times since I was a kid. So whenever there was something to celebrate, or we just needed to decompress, we'd grab coffee and drive the familiar 30-minute route to talk or vent. One night, during our freshman year of college, we started a drive around 8 p.m. without coffee. The first 15 minutes were normal. We were probably talking about our friend group or our love lives. As we neared the section of the road where the mountains start to go downhill, I saw bright headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it as we'd seen a few cars at turnoffs on the road, and many people chose the route for the scenic views during the day. I kept driving and talking, but my friend suddenly cut me off. Geez, they're coming up fast. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw she was right. The car behind us was flying. I started to get annoyed as they got so close they were practically on my bumper. I kept my eye on their headlights, thinking they'd pass since they were clearly in a hurry and there was no oncoming traffic. But after 5 minutes, the car was still on my tail, so close I couldn't see their headlights anymore. They started flashing their brights on and off, sometimes slowing down, then speeding up to get even closer. Now I was getting really angry. I was going the speed limit, and the lane was clear, so why weren't they passing? Thinking it was some teen or someone looking for trouble, I asked my friend if she could see who the driver was. She said it looked like just one man. I slowed down to about 5 miles under the limit to force them to pass. We were now on a flat stretch near the bottom of the mountain. But instead of passing, the car suddenly accelerated, almost hitting my car as it swerved around me. We both cursed, then kept driving, annoyed at being cut off. As we went around a curve in a less wooded area, we saw the car parked on the side of the road with its headlights on. I drove past, but a few seconds later, they pulled out behind me again, repeating the same routine of flashing their brights, speeding up, and almost hitting my bumper. By now, my friend and I had gone from angry to scared. This car was clearly targeting us. My car was easy to spot because it was covered in anime stickers. Before I could think more, they swerved around me again, almost hitting my car again, and I had to swerve. I was relieved and annoyed to see them turn left onto a secluded road that led away from town. To get away from them, I turned right onto a shortcut about 700 feet away, which led back to town. After 5 minutes of peace, we started talking again. As I turned right onto the main road that led into town, I carefully checked both ways and saw no headlights from the left. But just 30 seconds later, that car was behind me again, doing the same thing. This meant they had deliberately circled back, turned off their headlights so I wouldn't see them, and followed us. My friend noticed there were now 3 men in the car instead of 1. We were both 2 19-year-old girls, and we were terrified. I told my friend I was going to drive to the police station so they wouldn't know where we lived. She agreed. Just then, a pickup truck pulled out of a nearby farm. Fearing it was their accomplice, we stayed on high alert. But the car behind us started to slow down and turned off its headlights, easing our tension. As we got into the outskirts of town, I saw them turn into a residential neighborhood while the truck continued straight. With no more headlights behind us, we both breathed a huge sigh of relief. To this day, we no longer live in the dorms, but we still take mountain drives. However, we never ever go at night anymore. It's hard to talk about what happened to me last winter. Just typing these lines makes my hands shake, but I need to get this out. See if anyone else has been through something similar. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip in northern Ontario. My best friend Mike and I had planned it for months. One last adventure before the snow made the trails impassable. We were both experienced outdoorsmen. I'd been camping in the Canadian wilderness since I was a kid. I was confident I knew the boreal forest like the back of my hand. Or so I thought. We set up camp by a small, frozen lake, about 15 miles from the nearest road. The temperature dropped fast as the sun went down, maybe to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 15 Celsius, but our tent was solid and we had a decent fire going. Around 7 p.m., Mike realized we were running low on firewood. We needed more to get through the night. I was the one who'd been slacking on gathering wood earlier, so I volunteered. "Don't go too far," Mike said, poking the fire. "A storm's coming in." I grabbed my headlamp, pulled my beanie down, and walked into the woods. The forest was pitch black, but my headlamp was bright and I knew what I was doing. Just go in a straight line, get some wood, and follow my tracks back. Simple. It wasn't simple. I got maybe a couple hundred yards when the first snowflakes started to fall. They were big and soft, the kind of snow that piles up fast. I wasn't worried. My tracks were still clear in the headlamp's beam, and I've always had a good sense of direction. I found a downed tree, started breaking off branches, and got a good armful of firewood. Then I noticed the silence. If you've ever been in a forest when it snows, you know how it dampens sound. This was different. This was absolute silence. No wind in the branches, no distant animal sounds, nothing. Just the crunch of snow under my boots and my own breathing. I decided I had enough, wouldn't turn back for camp. That's when things got weird. My footprints were being covered by the new snow faster than they should have been. I could still see them, but they seemed to be leading in the wrong direction. I'm not the type to panic. I've been lost before, and the rule is always stay calm, use your head. I took a deep breath and tried to get my bearings. The camp was to the northeast, I was pretty sure. I started walking, following the fading tracks. After about 10 minutes, I knew something was wrong. I should have been back at camp. The snow was falling heavier now, and a feeling of dread started to creep in. I called out for Mike, but my voice seemed to be swallowed by the snow, not traveling more than a few feet. I stopped to think, and that's when I heard it. A sound so strange, unlike anything I'd ever heard in these woods. It was like a cry, but not quite. Almost as if someone was trying to mimic a human sound, but getting it horribly wrong. It started low, then rose to a shriek that hurt my teeth, before cutting off abruptly. My mouth went dry. Whatever made that sound, it wasn't natural. I yelled for Mike again, louder. No answer. I swept my headlamp in a wide circle, looking for a sign of the camp. The light just hit endless trees and snow. Then I heard the cry again, closer this time. It came from somewhere to my left. I knew I shouldn't, but I turned and shined my light that way. About 50 yards away, on a large, flat rock sticking out of the snow, there was something. At first, I thought it was a fox. The shape was similar. But immediately, I knew I was wrong. This thing was too big, the size of a large coyote. Its proportions were all wrong. The legs were too long and thin. The body was weirdly angular. Its face was what really chilled me. It was pointed like a fox's, but flatter, with a jaw that was unnaturally wide. But the eyes made my blood run cold. They were huge, out of proportion with the face, and forward-facing like a predator's. They didn't reflect the light of my headlamp like an animal's eyes should. They were just black, impossibly black, like two holes cut into reality. I froze. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. We just stared at each other across the snowy space. I tried to scare it off. "Hey," I yelled, waving my free arm. The creature didn't move, didn't blink, just stared with those awful eyes. "Go on, get out of here," I yelled, stomping my foot in the snow. No reaction. I don't know how long we stood there. It could have been seconds or minutes. Time seemed to stretch like taffy. The snow was still falling, but I didn't feel the cold anymore. Then I realized something else. As I looked into those eyes, a feeling washed over me. Not fear. I was already terrified, but a profound sadness. A sorrow so immense it felt like my chest was caving in. It was like the feeling I had at my grandmother's funeral when I was 12, but 100 times more intense. It felt like every sad moment of my life was happening at once. And I knew somehow this feeling was coming from the creature. It was doing this to me, amplifying my emotions, or maybe absorbing them. Tears froze on my cheeks, and I realized I was crying. With a huge effort, I tore my eyes away and turned my back. My legs were shaking so hard I could barely stand. I yelled Mike's name again, my voice cracking with desperation. Mercifully, I heard him call back. His voice was far away, but it was him. I moved towards the sound, not daring to look back, afraid of what might be following. I yelled again, and Mike answered, closer this time. I moved faster, stumbling through the snow, dropping my firewood but not caring. I just wanted to get back to camp, to safety, warmth, another person. I practically fell into the campsite. Mike was standing by the fire, a worried look on his face. "Where the hell have you been for an hour?" he asked. I couldn't speak. I dropped the last of the wood and collapsed by the fire, shaking uncontrollably. Mike thought I was hypothermic and started wrapping me in blankets, but it wasn't the cold that was making me shake. When I told him what happened, he was skeptical but concerned. He said he didn't hear any strange sounds, just me calling out from the woods. He offered to go check, but I grabbed his arm so hard he winced. There was no way I was letting him go back out there. We stayed up all night, keeping the fire big. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those black eyes staring. I kept hearing things in the woods that Mike swore weren't there. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I convinced Mike to pack up early. He wanted to check the rock where I'd seen the creature, but I refused. Finally, he went alone, while I shivered and broke camp, jumping at every sound. When he came back, he looked confused. He said he found the rock, but there were no animal tracks around it. The fresh snow was completely undisturbed. "You must have gotten disoriented," he said softly, helping me with my pack. "Maybe it was just a regular fox, and the darkened snow made it look weird." I didn't argue. What was the point? I knew what I'd seen. More importantly, I knew what I'd felt. We hiked out of the woods that day, barely speaking. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched the whole way, even though Mike saw nothing unusual. It's been 8 months. I don't camp anymore. I can't bring myself to go back into the forest, not even in the daytime, not even in summer. I've tried to rationalize what happened. Stress, exhaustion, maybe mild hypothermia playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I know better. What I encountered that night was not natural. Not a fox, not a coyote, not any regular forest creature. It was something else. Something that doesn't belong in our world, or at least the parts of it we normally see. The worst part isn't the fear. It's the feeling that stayed with me since that night. The only way I can describe it is the feeling that something was taken from me. Not physically, but spiritually, emotionally. I don't know the right word. I only know there's a void inside me now that wasn't there before. Like that thing reached inside me and took a piece of me and carried it back to wherever it belongs. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and swear I hear that wailing cry, even though I live in a city now, far from any forest. And in those moments, between waking and dreaming, I feel those eyes on me again, watching, judging, absorbing. I don't know what it was. Maybe a forest spirit, a creature from another dimension, or something that's evolved in the deepest parts of the wild, away from human eyes. All I know is for those few minutes standing in that snowy forest, I wasn't fully on Earth anymore. I was somewhere in between, in a place it calls home, and it saw me as an intruder. I'm writing this because I need to know if anyone else has experienced something similar. Has anyone else seen those eyes, felt that deep sadness, felt a piece of them being taken? Because if it's real, if that thing is really out there in the northern woods, people need to know. And if it's not real, if it was all in my head, then maybe that's even worse. Because 8 months later, I still feel those eyes on me, and I don't think they'll ever stop. Last year, when I was 15, I was just hanging out with my friend Dylan at his new place in Bridgeport. It's a tiny beach town where nothing ever happens. His family had moved in about 2 months before. The house used to belong to 3 old ladies the whole town called the Golden Girls. They were best friends, lived together for decades until they died a few months apart. The house went up for sale, and Dylan's parents got a good deal. It was a normal summer day. Hot, maybe 90 degrees Fahrenheit, 32 Celsius. I biked over to Dylan's around 4 p.m. His parents were at work, so it was just us. We ordered pizza, played video games, and just chilled in the living room. The house was pretty old but nice, lots of wood paneling and big windows that let in a lot of light until the sun went down. Around 8 p.m., we were still in the living room. Dylan was playing some shooter on his PlayStation, and I was scrolling Instagram on my phone, half paying attention to his game. The room was dim because we only had one corner lamp on. Dylan hated overhead lights when he gamed, so they caused glare on the TV. That's when it happened. I felt something above my head and looked up, thinking maybe a spider was dangling from the ceiling. I'm not scared of spiders, but something made me look. What I saw wasn't a spider. Not at all. About 2 feet 60 centimeters above my head, there was this thing. It was thin, black, about the length of my index finger, and it was moving in a bizarre way. It wasn't dropping straight down like a spider on a web. It was undulating, like a worm or an eel swimming through water, but it was in midair, moving toward my face. I recoiled so fast I almost fell off the couch. "What the hell?" I yelled. Dylan paused his game. "What's wrong?" I couldn't speak at first. I just stared at the black thing hovering where my head had been seconds before. It wasn't solid black. It was more like a deep gray with subtle shifts on its surface, almost translucent in some spots. "There's something," I pointed, my hand shaking. "Right there. Don't you see it?" Dylan looked where I was pointing and frowned. "See what?" "The black thing. It looks like a worm, but it's just floating in the air." As we were talking, the thing changed direction. Instead of continuing down, it started to drift upward, very slowly, as if a gentle breeze was carrying it. But there was no breeze. The windows were closed. The air conditioning had been broken all day. I kept pointing at it. "There, right there. It's drifting up." Dylan stood up, walked over, and waved his hand through the air where the thing was hovering. His hand went right through the spot, but the thing didn't react. It just kept slowly moving up. My heart was pounding, a lump in my throat. I blinked hard, thinking maybe something was in my eye, or I was hallucinating. But when I opened my eyes, it was still there, moving in that odd way. "I swear, Dylan, it's right there." My voice was almost a whisper. I was so freaked out and confused. Why couldn't he see it? It was so obviously there, this black worm hovering in his living room. I watched it drift higher and higher, so slowly I could track its every movement. When it reached the ceiling, actually touched the ceiling, it didn't stop. It just went right through the solid surface as if the ceiling was an illusion, as if physical barriers meant nothing to it. Then it was gone. I jumped up, flicking on every light in the room. My hands were shaking so bad I had trouble with the switch. I paced back and forth under the spot where I saw it, staring at the ceiling, trying to find some sign, a tiny hole, a crack, anything to explain it. There was nothing. The ceiling was a solid slab with that bumpy texture of old houses. No holes, no cracks, nothing out of the ordinary. "Jess, you're kind of freaking me out," Dylan said, watching me pace. "What do you think you saw?" "I don't think I saw it," I snapped. It was right there. I ran to the bathroom, checking my eyes in a mirror. They were normal, not red, no sign of anything weird. I pulled down my lower lid, looking for a speck of dust or an eyelash that could have caused a shadow. Nothing. When I got back to the living room, Dylan was sitting on the couch, looking worried. "Maybe it was a floater," he suggested. "You know, those little specks that sometimes drift through your vision? I'd seen floaters before. This wasn't one. Floaters move with your eye. This thing was swimming in the air, going in one direction then changing. They don't have a distinct shape or that kind of movement. And they definitely don't go through ceilings." "I'm not crazy," I told Dylan. "I'm not on drugs. You know, I don't mess with that stuff." He nodded. "I know, but maybe you're tired. Or it's a migraine aura. My mom sees weird stuff before she gets a migraine, but I didn't have a headache. I felt perfectly fine, except for my pounding heart and shaking hands. We tried to get back to normal after that. Dylan went back to his game. and I pretended to be on my phone, but I couldn't focus. I kept glancing at the ceiling, half afraid it would come back. We didn't talk much after that, and I left early, around 9:30 p.m., saying I wasn't feeling well. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that black worm thing. The way it moved was unlike anything I had ever seen. Not like an insect, not like dust, not like anything natural. It moved with purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going. The next morning, I tried to convince myself I must have been exhausted or tricked by the light. But deep down, I knew what I saw was real. A few days later, I went back to Dylan's house, determined to act normal. We didn't bring it up, but I noticed he'd rearranged the living room. The couch I had been sitting on was now against a different wall. When I asked, Dylan got a little flustered, saying his mom wanted to try a new layout. But later, when it was just the two of us, he admitted he moved the couch because he couldn't stop thinking about the thing I saw. He said he'd had trouble sleeping since that night. "Had you seen anything else weird in this house?" I asked. He hesitated before answering. "Not seen, but I've heard whispering sometimes. My parents say it's just the pipes or the house settling." But he trailed off, shrugging. "But what? It doesn't sound like pipes. It sounds like people talking real quiet." Only at night, around 3 a.m., a chill ran down my spine. "Did you tell your parents?" "No way. They'll think I'm messing with them. My dad already thinks I watch too many horror movies." After that conversation, I started to notice other things when I went over to Dylan's. Unnaturally cold spots in warm rooms. The feeling of being watched when no one was there. One time, I swear I heard someone call my name when it was just me and Dylan. But I never saw the black worm thing again. Not at Dylan's house, not anywhere. It just appeared once for about 2 minutes, but it changed everything. I spent months trying to figure out what it was. I looked up every kind of insect, every kind of visual hallucination, every possible scientific explanation. Nothing fit what I saw. The closest stories were from people who claimed to have seen interdimensional entities or spirits, which made me even more uncomfortable because I never believed in that stuff. I still don't know if what I saw was supernatural or if there's an explanation I just haven't found. But I know it was real. It was in that room, moving in a way that defied physics, and for some reason, only I could see it. Dylan and his family still live in that house. He doesn't mention the whispering anymore, but sometimes when I visit, I catch him staring at the ceiling, just like I do. I wonder if he's seen something he's not willing to admit. For me, I can't stop thinking about it. What was it? Where did it come from? Why did only I see it? And most importantly, was it aware of me? Did it know I was looking at it? I don't have answers. All I know is that for a few minutes last summer, the line between what's possible and what isn't seemed to disappear right in front of me. Now I can't help but wonder what else is out there, just hovering around us, only visible to some, passing through our world as if it's just a temporary obstacle. I was 10 years old when it happened. My 5th grade class was on a field trip to Fremantle Prison. I'd never been, and honestly, I wasn't thrilled about it. Something about old prisons always felt unsettling. The stories of people locked up, the suffering that went on behind those walls. But my friends were excited, so I pretended to be too. That morning, my stomach was in knots. My mom made me a peanut butter sandwich, an apple, and a juice box for lunch. I couldn't eat my breakfast. My mom asked if I was sick, and I said no because I didn't want to miss the trip with my friends. Now I wish I had stayed home that day. It was a cloudy Tuesday in May. The bus ride to Fremantle was about 40 minutes from our school in Perth. I sat next to my best friend, Lily, and we spent most of the time playing clapping games and talking about a TV show we both loved, just normal kid stuff. I remember when the bus pulled up to the prison, the first thing that struck me was how massive and intimidating it looked. The limestone walls were so tall, cold, and unwelcoming. Our teacher, Ms. Barnes, gathered the class in the visitor center. There were about 25 of us, all chattering, a mix of excited and a little bit nervous. I stuck close to Lily and another friend, Emma. I always felt safer with them. Our tour guide, some guy named Greg or Craig, introduced himself. He was in his 30s, had a beard and glasses, and talked about the prison's history with a lot of enthusiasm. He told us Fremantle Prison was built by convicts in the 1850s and was operational until 1991, only about 10 years before we were there. As the tour started, I got more and more anxious. The air inside felt different, heavier. It smelled musty and old, like no amount of cleaning could ever scrub away the decades of human presence. I held Lily's hand as we walked through the main gate into the cell block. The first part of the tour wasn't so bad. We saw the cells on the ground floor, and the guide explained what life was like for the prisoners. The cells were tiny, just big enough for a bed and nothing more. I thought it was awful to be locked up in such a small space. A few boys in my class were goofing off, pretending to lock each other in, but Ms. Barnes quickly shut it down. Then we went up to the second floor. That's when everything changed for me. The stairs were steep, with metal railings. As we climbed, the guide said something that chilled me. He pointed to the large safety nets installed between the staircases and explained they were put in to stop prisoners from committing suicide or even killing others by jumping from the railings. The casual way he said it gave me goosebumps. I was already holding Lily's hand, but I squeezed it tighter. We gathered on the second floor walkway while the guide kept talking about the daily routine of the inmates. I wasn't listening anymore. Something felt wrong. It was that feeling you get when you think someone is looking at you, but when you turn around, no one is there. Only this time, when I looked down the walkway toward the cells, there was someone there. I still remember every detail of what I saw. About 15 meters away from our group was a man. He looked about 40 or 50, with a gaunt face and sunken eyes. He was completely naked except for an old-style pair of white underwear, not like modern briefs. But what made my blood run cold was the wound on his head. It was large, dark, covering part of his forehead and temple. He was just standing there, looking right at me. Our eyes met. For a moment that felt like forever, but was probably only 10 seconds, we just stared at each other. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even blink. Then, without breaking eye contact, he slowly turned and walked into a cell. The door to the cell was closed. He walked right through it. I knew in that instant. It wasn't like in the movies with dramatic music or some sudden revelation. It was just a quiet, horrifying understanding that washed over me like ice. I had seen a ghost, a dead prisoner who had looked right at me and then walked through a solid door. I must have made a sound because Lily turned to me and asked if I was okay. I couldn't speak. My throat was tight. I just shook my head and stood behind Lily and Emma, trying to make myself as small as possible. For the rest of the tour, I just stared at the floor or my friends' backs, too scared to look anywhere else, terrified I would see him again. I need to explain something. When I was younger, I used to have what my parents called visual disturbances from a trauma when I was very little. Usually, they were just shadows in the corner of my eye, or vague shapes that disappeared when I looked at them directly. Not like this. Not this detail, this clear, this real. The man I saw was no shadow or trick of the light. I saw his chest rise and fall slightly as he breathed. I saw his skin, pale, almost waxy. I saw individual strands of his thin, graying hair, and that wound. It was wet, like it was fresh, with dried blood caked around the edges. These were not details my mind could have made up. The rest of the tour is a blur. I felt nauseous and dizzy. When we went back to the visitor center for lunch, I couldn't eat anything. Lily kept asking me what was wrong, but I just said I felt sick. I was scared that if I told them what I saw, they would think I was making it up for attention, or worse, that I was having my episodes again and needed to go back to therapy. On the bus ride back to school, I sat alone. Lily wanted to sit with me, but I said I needed space because I wasn't feeling well. The truth was I couldn't stand the thought of talking to anyone. I just kept replaying what I had seen, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But I knew it was. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. His hollow eyes looking right at me. I kept my night light on all night, something I hadn't done in years. The next morning, my mom saw how quiet I was and asked if something happened on the trip. I shook my head, said I was just tired. Over the next few days, I tried to forget. I threw myself into my schoolwork and my friends, but the image of that man haunted me. Sometimes, when I was alone in my room, I felt like he was watching me. I'd whip my head around, heart pounding, but of course, no one was there. I never went back to Fremantle Prison. Years later, when friends suggested doing a night tour or a Halloween event there, I always made an excuse. Just the thought of going back, especially at night, made me feel sick. As I got older, I looked into Fremantle Prison. I learned that many people have reported paranormal experiences there over the years. Former guards, visitors, even kids on other tours said they'd seen the ghosts of old prisoners. Some of the stories described what I saw: a man in white underwear with a head wound. It turns out, in the 1960s, a prisoner committed suicide by jumping from an upper floor, sustaining a fatal head injury. His cell was in the exact same section of the second floor where I saw the man. I know what people will say if I tell this story. They'll say I was a suggestible kid who had heard ghost stories and had an overactive imagination. They'll say the guide's stories about suicide triggered my old episodes. They'll say it was all in my head. But I know what I saw. I know the difference between my childhood hallucinations and what happened that day. The man I saw was as real as you are reading this. He saw me. He knew I saw him. The worst part is the feeling I've carried with me ever since. The feeling that by seeing him, I opened some kind of door. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I feel like he's still watching me, as if he followed me home from that prison. Even now, 15 years later, living in a different city, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night with a certain feeling that if I open my eyes, he'll be standing at the foot of my bed, looking at me with those hollow eyes, the wounds still fresh on his head. I've never told this to anyone until now. I don't know why I'm sharing it now. Maybe just to see if anyone else has gone through something similar, or just to get it out of my system. But even typing this, my hands are shaking and my heart is racing. Some things stay with you forever. Some ghosts never leave. I've never told the whole story about my sister, Courtney, to anyone. Not a therapist, not my wife, not even my parents. How could I? They'd think I was insane or that this story would break their hearts all over again. But it's been eating at me for 31 years, and I need to get it out. Maybe someone else out there has been through something similar. Courtney died 31 years ago, on her birthday. She was only 4 years old when a sudden illness took her in less than a week. I never met her, at least not while she was alive. I was born 11 months after she passed. My parents kept her room the same for years, and they had pictures of her all over our house in Oak Ridge. Growing up, I always felt like I knew her in some way. This is where it gets complicated. From my earliest memories, when I was about 3 or 4, Courtney was there. Not always in a clear, visible way, but I felt her presence. Sometimes I'd wake up and see her sitting at the foot of my bed, looking just like the little girl in the photos. Short blonde hair, blue eyes, wearing her favorite yellow dress. Other times, I just felt her in the room, a warm, comforting feeling like having an invisible friend, but I knew it was her. My parents never knew. I never told them because even as a kid, I understood it would hurt them. They'd already been through enough pain losing her. Courtney appeared most often during my difficult times. When I was 7 and broke my arm falling off my bike, she sat with me at the hospital while we waited for my parents to arrive. No one else saw her, but she was there, holding my good hand. When I was 10 and the bully Kyle Jennings made my life miserable for a whole semester, She'd appear in my room after a bad day. She was quiet during these visits, just there until I felt better. But her most frequent visits were in my dreams. These weren't normal dreams. They felt completely real. In these dreams, Courtney appeared as a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, what she would have looked like if she'd lived. Her blonde hair was longer, but the same bright blue eyes. She'd tell me about her life on the other side, as she called it. She'd ask about my life, listen to my problems, and give me deep advice that a kid's mind couldn't have come up with on its own. I always woke up from these dreams with tears on my face, not from sadness, but from a feeling like my soul understood something my mind couldn't grasp. When I was about 12, I had the most vivid dream of all. This time, Courtney appeared as a child, her photo age. She took my hand and led me through an endless field of tall, golden grass. In the center was a massive tree with branches that went on forever. We ran and played tag, climbed the lower branches, and laughed in a way I've never laughed in real life. As the sun began to set in the dream world, we sat at the base of the tree. She looked at me seriously and said, "This is where I live now, Michael. One day you'll come here too, but not for a very, very long time." I woke up sobbing so hard my mom came into my room. I couldn't explain why, so I blamed it on a monster nightmare. Throughout my early teens, the visits, both in dreams and while awake, continued. They became normal to me. I never questioned why I could see my dead sister when others couldn't. She was just a part of my life, my secret protector. Then came the night that changed everything. I was 16. It was a Friday night in October, and I was out with friends. Nothing special, just hanging around a mall and seeing a movie. I got dropped off at my house around 11:30 p.m. The house was dark except for the porch light my parents always left on for me. It was a cold night, and I remember the dry leaves crunching on the walkway as I headed to the side door. We rarely used the front door. Everyone came in through the kitchen door on the side of the house. I had a tiny keychain flashlight, just enough to see the lock. The door had small glass panes at eye level. As I put the key in the lock, I saw movement in my reflection on the glass. I turned around, expecting to see Courtney like I had hundreds of times before. But what I saw, man, I still see it every time I close my eyes. It was Courtney, but not the Courtney I knew. Her face, half of it was still her, but the left side was a nightmare of exposed bone and rotting flesh. Where her left eye should have been was just a hollow socket, and I swear to God, there were tiny white maggots wriggling inside. Her jaw was lopsided, showing blackened teeth and a dark space behind them. Her yellow dress was stained with dirt and mold. Her blonde hair was sparse, missing in clumps, showing her scalp. Her skin looked like it was melting, just sloughing off her body like candle wax. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I just stood there, key in the lock, staring at this horror show version of my sister. She didn't speak, didn't move closer. She just stood about 10 feet 3 meters away in the grass, looking at me with her one good blue eye. I thought, this isn't real. It can't be. I blinked hard, looked back at my reflection in the door's glass, hoping to see nothing. When I looked back at the yard, she was gone. My legs almost gave out. I fumbled with the lock, stumbled into the kitchen, and slammed the door shut. I slid down the floor, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My parents were asleep upstairs. I just sat there on the kitchen floor, maybe for hours, too afraid to move, too afraid she was waiting inside. Finally, I got the courage to check every room, turning on every light. Nothing. No sign of Courtney, not the comforting presence I'd known or the horrifying image I'd just seen. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat up in my bed with the lights on, waiting for the sun. I thought for sure I'd have a dream about that image, but when I finally dozed off near dawn, my sleep was empty, dreamless. And then there was nothing. Courtney never came back. Not in my dreams, not in my room, not in my times of trouble. Her presence, my constant sister, my friend, my protector, was completely gone. At first, I thought it was just the shock of what I had seen. Maybe I had accidentally blocked her out. I tried to call to her to invite her back. I'd lie in bed at night, whispering her name, hoping to feel that familiar warmth. Nothing. As weeks turned into months, I started to panic. I researched ghosts, spirits, anything that could explain her presence and this sudden disappearance. I even went to a psychic in college, though I was too ashamed to tell her the whole story. She just said vague things about spirits sometimes leaving when their work is done. But that didn't explain that night. Why would my sister, who was always gentle and protective, appear as a rotting corpse? Was it even her? Or was it something pretending to be her? And why did she vanish completely afterward? I'm in my 30s now. It's been 14 years since I last saw or felt Courtney. I still think about her almost every day. I've tried everything to get her back. Meditation, prayer, even a Ouija board once, which freaked me out so much I burned it afterward. Nothing works. Sometimes I wonder if I made it all up. Maybe she was never there. Maybe I was just a lonely kid who created an imaginary friend based on the sister I never knew. But that doesn't explain how she knew things I couldn't have, or how the dreams felt so real, or the sheer horror of that final encounter. The only theory that makes sense to me is that something happened to Courtney in whatever realm she exists in. Maybe she wasn't supposed to be visiting me all those years. Maybe something caught up to her and punished her for it. The thought that she might be in pain because of our connection haunts me. Or the thing I fear the most, maybe it wasn't Courtney that last night. Maybe something else saw our connection and exploited it, something that wanted to sever that tie forever. I miss her. Not just the comfort she brought, but the feeling of having a sister watching over me, that I wasn't alone. Now I feel her absence like a physical ache. I still imagine that tree in the golden field. I hope she's there, safe and at peace. And I hope that one day, a long, long time from now, I'll see her again. The real her, not the nightmare version from our last encounter. If anyone has been through something similar or has any thoughts, please let me know. I've carried this story alone for too long. In 2001, I was a medic working with the city's emergency response team. I'd seen my share of trauma calls before, but nothing prepared me for what happened on September 11th. Around 8:45 a.m., I was finishing my coffee when a call came in. The initial reports were confused, something about a plane hitting the North Tower. We all figured it was a small plane, maybe a Cessna that went off course. But when we got to the scene 20 minutes later, the reality of it hit us like a physical punch. I remember stepping out of the ambulance and freezing. The tower was on fire, black smoke boiling into a perfect September blue sky. People were screaming, running everywhere, papers fluttering down like some twisted confetti joke. And then there were the things I tried not to look at, the things falling from the upper floors. Our team was directed to help set up a triage area. We were organizing supplies when the second plane hit. The sound. God, I'll never forget that sound. The explosion, the collective gasp, and then scream from everyone around us. That's when we knew this wasn't an accident. Everything after that was a blur of motion and noise. Other responders arrived. Police tried to set up a perimeter. Firefighters rushed into the buildings. I remember thinking how small they looked against the massive towers, like ants heading into a furnace. Our orders changed fast. Some of us were redirected to help the wounded coming out of the buildings. Others, including me, were told to start assessing and tagging victims in a nearby debris field where chunks of the building had fallen. I was trained for mass casualty incidents. Black tags for the dead or unsalvageable. Red tags for critical but savable. Yellow for serious but stable. Green for minor injuries. It's a cold clinical system meant to optimize resources in an overwhelming situation. But nothing about that day felt clinical. The first few victims I came across were clearly dead. Massive trauma from falling debris. I put a black tag on them and moved on, trying to stay professional while my brain tried to process what my eyes were seeing. The dust was so thick it coated my throat and stung my eyes. The air smelled of jet fuel, burning materials, and things I don't want to name. That's when I found her. She was partially pinned under a chunk of concrete and twisted metal, about 75 yards from the North Tower. At first glance, she looked like just another victim, a professional woman in business clothes, maybe in her early 50s with neat, shoulder-length brown hair. She had small pearl earrings and light makeup. She looked like someone's mom on her way to an office job, maybe for years. I knelt beside her to confirm what I assumed was obvious. And then her eyes opened. Clear, alert eyes that locked onto mine with an intensity that made me recoil slightly. "I'm not dead," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Call my daughter." I'd worked enough trauma scenes where dying people say irrational things. The brain does strange stuff as it shuts down, but her voice was so clear and lucid. That's when I really looked at her injuries, and what I saw still haunts my nightmares. From her diaphragm down, there was nothing recognizable as human. The debris had severed her body below the ribcage, crushing and tearing everything below it. There was a surprising lack of blood. The trauma had likely cauterized most of the major vessels, at least temporarily. But she shouldn't have been conscious. She shouldn't have been speaking. The shock alone should have knocked her out, if not killed her instantly. I reached for my black tag. There was no question. This was an unsalvageable injury. That's when her hand reached out and grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "I'm not dead," she repeated, more forcefully this time. "Please, my daughter needs to know I'm here." I've replayed this moment 1,000 times in my head. Did I do the right thing? I don't know. But in that moment, looking into her eyes, I couldn't bring myself to put a black tag on her while she watched. "Help is on the way," I lied, my voice cracking. "What's your daughter's name?" "Emily," she said. "She works at Meyer Lynch downtown. Please call her." I nodded, writing the info in my triage log, knowing full well that communications were chaotic and I had no way to make a call. I told her I would make sure her daughter was notified, and she seemed to relax a little. I tucked the black tag partially under her shoulder, out of sight, and moved on to the next victim. But I kept passing her position as I worked. And each time she was still conscious, still calling out, "I'm not dead," she'd say to whoever came near, "Please tell my daughter I'm here." An hour passed, then another. By all medical knowledge I had, she should have been dead within minutes of such a catastrophic injury. Yet she remained alert, talking to responders even as the situation around us got worse. I was checking on a firefighter who had a broken leg when I heard the rumbling. I'll never forget that sound, like a freight train mixed with a massive burst of fire. Someone screamed, "Run," and the firefighter pushed me away from him. "Go," he yelled. I ran, the ground shaking under my feet as the South Tower began to collapse. The cloud of dust and debris chased us like something alive, something hungry. I dove under an ambulance, covering my mouth and nose with my shirt as the world turned to a blanket of gray. When the dust started to settle and I could move, everything had changed. The landscape was unrecognizable. Where there had been debris fields, victims, and responders, there was now a uniform blanket of dust and larger chunks of material. I stumbled back to where I'd been working, choking on the air, my eyes burning. The firefighter I had been helping was gone, either rescued by someone else or buried. And the woman, I couldn't find her right away. The landmarks I had used were gone, but somehow I heard her voice over the chaos. "I'm not dead." I followed the sound, crawling over unstable debris until I found her. Incredibly, she was still there, now completely covered in gray dust except for her eyes, which still blinked up at me with the same clarity as before. "You came back," she said. I didn't know what to say. I just knelt beside her, taking her hand, which was cold but still gripped mine with purpose. "Did you call Emily?" she asked. "Not yet," I admitted. The phones aren't working right, but I will." She nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Tell her mother loves her. Tell her I'm sorry about our fight last week. It was so stupid. I will, I promise." My throat choked with emotion. And then she said the thing that still chills me. "They're coming back. You know, you should go." Before I could ask what she meant, another rumble started. The North Tower was coming down. Someone grabbed my arm and pulled me to my feet. A fellow responder, though I don't know who. We were all gray ghosts by then. "Run!" They yelled at me, and I ran. I ran and didn't look back. The rest of that day is a series of snapshots in my mind. The eerie quiet after the towers were completely gone. The thick dust muting all sound and turning day into dusk. The shocked faces of the survivors and responders. The desperate search for anyone alive under the rubble. I never saw the woman again. I looked for her when we could go back into that area, but there was nothing. Just rubble and dust. I checked my logbook later, wanting to at least follow through on my promise to contact her daughter. But the page with the information was unreadable, saturated with sweat, dust, and maybe tears. For months afterward, I told myself she was a hallucination, a manifestation of my brain trying to cope with the unimaginable horror. The alternative, that I had witnessed a woman who was lucid and speaking with injuries that made survival impossible, was too much to process. But 22 years later, I still hear her voice sometimes as I'm falling asleep. I'm not dead. Clear, insistent, present. I've been through therapy. I was diagnosed with PTSD. I've been told that traumatic experiences can create vivid false memories. I understand that intellectually, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And sometimes on the anniversary of that terrible day, I search news archives for any mention of a woman named Emily who worked at Merrill Lynch, maybe a typo for Meyer Lynch, who lost her mother on September 11th. I have never found one. Maybe that's for the best. I don't expect anyone to believe this story. Hell, half the time I don't believe it myself. But I needed to finally put it into words to externalize this thing that's been living in my head for over 2 decades. Because even now, when I close my eyes, I can see her face covered in gray dust, but somehow still vibrant, still present. I can feel her hand gripping mine with the strength of someone who is completely alive, not someone who should have died minutes before. And I can hear her voice as clearly as if she were talking to me today. I'm not dead. And sometimes in my darkest moments, I wonder if she ever was.